Welcome to another episode of Pistons of Fury. In this episode, we are routing all of our AC lines in the engine compartment, and this is the last thing we have to do before we pull the LS out and paint and detail everything. So in this episode, we are tackling the AC system in the Dodge Coronet LS turbo motor swap, all that stuff. And what we're going to be doing is basically taking the stock air conditioning compressor, which comes with the LS swap, and adapting that, kind of retrofitting it to this chassis. One of the things we're going to be doing at a later point in the swap is installing a Resto Mod Air custom HVAC box inside the car. But the emphasis of this video and what this episode will kind of cover is basically how to plumb, kind of in a super custom universal way, your own AC system in the engine compartment. So we'll go through the different components involved in doing that. We'll highlight things that you have to buy, things you can get as a package, things you might have to get depending on your application. But yeah, so the goal here is to get everything plumbed in the engine compartment and buttoned up, because this is the last thing that I need to do before I actually pull the engine out and do all of my finished painting and welding and fab work and things like that. So kind of exciting. It's the last system I have to really kind of engineer and install. So why don't we come over to the bench and I'll show you guys what I'm working with. Okay, so these are some AC components, basically just hose ends that I got from a company called Nostalgic AC Parts. You can find them on Google. They're kind of one of the top searches that come up when you search for AC hose kits and things like that. They gave me this, well, they didn't give it to me. I purchased this entire kit, which came with a bunch of various hose ends, and it actually came with 3 different sizes of hose, which you'll need for this setup. And I also bought the version with a dryer. If you already have a dryer, on your chassis or whatever, you might be able to get away with using that. But since I didn't on this car, my car was an original AC car, but I didn't have any of the AC components. That was kind of long gone before I got the car. Not to mention, at this point, this stuff would have been, 60 years old at this point. So, super excited to, well, excited is probably a strong word, but it's going to be awesome to have an old car with this engine setup and functioning AC. That's something I'm actually really looking forward to. AC is important, in case you didn't know. Even if I live in a really nice part of the country with pretty consistent weather all year round, doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too cold. However, when it rains and you're driving the car, or on, points in time when there's like a different temperature inside the car versus out, you can get the window fogging, especially if you're into old cars. It's a really big problem, right? Because your window fogs up and there's all kinds of safety issues involved. So for me, this is really just like, the whole point of this is for defrost, essentially. Anyway, that was a tangent. So what we're looking at here is we basically have 3 different hose sizes. With AC systems, there's 3 different sizes of components. Number 6, so it's used like a pound symbol, 6, number 8, and number 10. Number 10 is basically used for the low pressure side of the system, and number 8 and number 6 are for the high pressure side. So the way this worked out, and I'm assuming that all AC systems are pretty universal, so this kit that I picked up came with all these different hose ends. I actually bought these adapters to adapt the Denso compressor on my LS to the different hose sizes. So I have one to a 8 and one to a 10, and these basically just bolt right in, and there's some O-rings that go on the bottom here. So basically what happens is I've drawn this little mock-up, which you can kind of see. So let's take a little look at that. So basically just have a couple holes here in my firewall, and what I have there is a number 10 and a number 6. So the number 6 is the high pressure side. So that'll basically go to the dryer. Dryer goes to the condenser. The condenser is that big flat thing that sits in front of your radiator, so it's kind of like a radiator for the AC system. So number 6 into there, number 8 out. Number 8 goes right to the compressor, and then the compressor has an out, which is a number 10, and that goes back to the firewall. So pretty simple system, actually. So what I need to do, and the first thing I'm going to be doing as part of this project, is essentially redoing a couple of the mounts for my radiator and building the mounts for the condenser. So I've got I didn't have the condenser when I installed the radiator, so I needed to make some changes to that setup, and I've got some stuff that I'll show you that I'm going to use to do that. But first things first, I ordered a custom condenser off eBay. I basically just measured the available size that I had in front of my radiator, ordered a condenser. Like I said, it's kind of all standard stuff, right? So the condenser came with a number 6 and a number 8, which matches up perfectly to the setup. So for once, the final system that I buy for this project, everything magically just kind of fits together. So now it's just getting the condenser mounted, and then I'll figure out where to mount the dryer. And from there, it's really just figuring out the hose lengths. And the final piece of this is, because these are not AN hoses, I am going to, once I get them to length, I'll probably just masking tape them together and then take them. There's a local Napa Auto Parts that still has a crimping service that they offer, so I can take these down there and they'll crimp them for me. So first things first, we got to get this condenser mounted, and yeah, so that will be the first thing we do, is get that mounted, get the radiator put back in, make sure none of that rubs, and then we'll work on some of the routing. So why don't we head over to the car. This is what I'm working with right now. So I have a few blocks on the bottom to give myself about 1 inch of clearance off of my my radiator support on the bottom, so it'll be kind of suspended in the air. And then I've got these bungees here just securing the top, and those are pinned against these wood shims that give me appropriate spacing between my intercooler and the condenser. So ideally, well, not ideally, but it's kind of like a mandatory thing, is you can't have things rubbing against each other, because eventually they will kind of rub through, even if it is aluminum on aluminum. So these are the original mounts that I had for my radiator. I've got some rubber spacers or bushings that I can kind of put in here and space the radiator out. But basically what's going to happen is I will have 2 tabs that kind of come out essentially as far as this wood, and I'll hold the radiator in here. I actually have a decent amount of room here in the front of the engine bay. So I will be pushing the radiator back this way a little bit just to gain myself some room for this condenser. We're going to mount the condenser about 4 inches off of the gap here, so there will be a little bit of room outside of that for airflow to get by to the radiator itself. But yeah, so I have number 8 hose up here, and then a number 6 on the bottom. Again, the 6 will go to the dryer, so the dryer's probably going to go in here, and I'll do some heat shielding and keep it away from the turbo. I'm going to have a turbo blanket and everything anyway, but dryer is probably going to go in there, so I'll need to figure out how the plumbing and the hose stuff routes. Yeah, and then AC compressors down there, you can kind of see it. So we'll have basically 1 elbow coming this way, 1 elbow going that way, number 10 to the back, number 6 to the front. And yeah, once I get this in here and get the radiator put back in behind it and all of that mounted, then I'll be able to start working on the plumbing. So first things first, let's get started on making some more brackets, which is like that's what this project should be called, just making brackets. I spent 2 years making brackets for this custom setup, but it's looking good. Look at this. Well, I got my parts, as you guys saw in the last episode, have all of my ceramic coated parts in here, so it's actually looking really good. It's kind of exciting. Alright, gonna get started making some more brackets. You know, there are just some projects that kind of kick your butt, and this is one of them. So here's where we are. Have this kind of mounted. This is totally rigged up, set up here. Basically a ratchet strap. I have some wood kind of spacing my condenser away from my radiator core. So as you can see here, I kind of have enough gap between my air conditioning connectors or fittings. So that all looks good. I've got a piece of cardboard kind of sandwiched between my intercooler and my condenser, so that should be pretty good spacing. And then these pieces of wood that I have here, they give me like a good inch or so between the condenser and the radiator, which is kind of like the recommended distance between the two. You want them close so you can seal this and make sure no air escapes from here, but at the same time you don't want them actually touching each other because of the heat transfer aluminum. So what this does, or what it means I guess for my setup, is that it pushes my radiator back into the engine bay, so I need to get a new 90-degree fitting here because this would probably be too close to the turbo for my liking. Down there, it's going to screw up my lower radiator hose, and TBD on whether or not it's going to screw up my top radiator hose. So, top, I'm thinking should be okay. I did some just kind of loose measurements with my elbow, and it should still clear. Whether or not the bends that I have in the top radiator hose are correct remains to be seen. So that's also TBD. So, worst case, I'm going to have to come in here and redo my radiator routing or hose routing. You can see the 90-degree hose at the bottom is now going to interfere with my exhaust pipe, so I need to think about what I'm going to do there. Couple options. One option is to hack these off and get some aluminum elbows that I can actually just weld directly onto this. That said, I don't have a TIG welder, so I actually can't do that welding. So this is kind of one of those annoying things where I may be reliant on a friend or taking it to a welding shop to get done. And that has me questioning whether or not I just need to buy a cheap eBay TIG welder and learn how to do it myself. So anyway, that's where we are on this. I still need to make the new lower mounts for the radiator, so that's probably going to be the next thing that I do, and then I'm probably just going to keep this secured. I'll get my hose lengths done so that I can get those hoses made up, and then I'll just yank the whole thing out and continue pulling all this stuff out of the engine bay. But the goal of this was really just to get my hoses and get the routing done. I need to figure out where I'm going to mount my dryer in here, and then how everything's going to route back to the firewall. But making progress, just trying to grind through this one. Yeah, it sucks having to redo stuff, but that's how it is. Should have done this in the beginning. So, note to self: when you're doing front stuff, make sure you get it all in there the first time before you start fabbing up hoses, and especially sandblasting and coating those pipes and things like that. Anyway, gonna see what I can do about these hoses and where I'm gonna start routing stuff. Alright, I've been trying to film as much as I can of this, but this is a really tight spot and it's just an impossible angle to kind of figure out what I'm doing in here and get the camera in the place where you can see it. So, just to detail, down here, that's one of my 90s that goes right into my the AC compressor. It's also got that little valve on it. You can see by the blue cap, so that's kind of I think it's like a purge valve or a fill valve. So, kind of accessible. The other one, not so much, so I may need to actually rethink how I'm doing that, but that's for a different time. So I've got my condenser up here. So we've got, this is a number 8, and it basically goes down behind the headlight through a hole that I've drilled in the firewall. I'm going to actually need to put a grommet on that when I do my install, and then that goes straight to the compressor, so that's that line right there. The other line is a number 6 at the bottom. Again, that pokes through the radiator support here and comes out here. So the next thing I need to do is mount my my dryer on the inner fender well here and then run the line. So that's actually the last set of lines that I have to run, because I also have a number 10 going into my firewall right there, and that's kind of a straight shot right to the AC compressor. So that's the low side. The bigger number 10 line is the low side. One thing that's becoming abundantly clear here is that I've got to do a really good job of insulating this downpipe, which I plan to. So, all part of the plan. Yeah, so last thing I need to do to button this up and get my hoses cut correctly and routed is do this number 6 line and get my dryer mounted up. One concern I am having, though, is that it's getting a little crowded down there. So I've got a lot of stuff going on right under my passenger side header and my downpipe, and that's actually where I was going to mount the coils. So there may need to be some rethinking in terms of what happens with my ignition coils, but that is for a different time, probably a little bit later in the build. I think most important thing now is I just need to get all this stuff routed. The other option I have with these AC hoses, or specifically this one here, this number 6, is running that inside my fender well or up here on top. But I've actually done a pretty good job of keeping all my plumbing so far kind of tucked away and out of sight. I'm not looking for like a super clean engine bay in terms of like shaved firewall and all that kind of stuff, but I would rather not have anything up here if I can avoid it. So anyway, we're gonna get the dryer mounted. We'll get this line run to that, and then we'll figure out the final routing to get all the way back to that last little guy on the firewall. So progress, slow but steady.